The Fellowship of Iron. The chamber was built of featureless gray stone, and it featured a stone table with heavy stone chairs jutting out from the floor to provide basic, utilitarian seats. Unfinished stone cups sat atop the table at every seat, and a plain stone pitcher stood at one end of the table. The only features of the room were half a dozen small doorways that led into niches with simple beds, and the main entrance, which was a heavy vault door that could only be opened from the outside. The Crucible, as the chamber was known, was a place built by Eirik the Unreasonable when he ascended the throne. In the first year of his reign, the Dwarven king had grown weary of foppish diplomats who wasted hours upon hours playing games with meetings and words. As such, he decreed that all meetings of import would take place in this unfurnished chamber, and that they would continue until a solution had been reached. The door to the outside could only be opened with the consent of all persons in the room, and it was manned by guards hand-picked by the king. Some argued that the use of this chamber alienated the kingdom's allies and led to overall more fraught relations, but it stayed in use throughout the Unreasonable's reign. Though his son Alric the Patient rescinded the use of the chamber for day-to-day affairs of the kingdom, it still saw use for meetings that required the utmost secrecy and where conclusions and agreements had to be reached. Meetings like this one. What you are demanding is madness, Teak Caldera declared, his slurring voice near to a shout. He flung out one hand as if encompassing the entire argument he'd just heard. It is absurd. It is a necessity, Shadden Crag said. The so-called Prince of the Crags folded his arms and shrugged his huge shoulders. We must either form a unified front, or we will fall one by one to this threat. There are no other options. There must be other ways, Darneth Red Hand growled. The scarred warrior had a face like a thunderhead, and his words came through gritted teeth. You would see our people cast into ruin to protect your own. A heavy fist slammed onto the table, the ringing impact silencing the arguing voices. Heads turned sharply, and hands flew on reflex as they reached for weapons that weren't there. Hauptmann Ironhelm put both his hands on the table and levered himself to his feet. Every movement came with the creak of steel joints and the whir of mechanisms, making the others wonder exactly how much flesh was left beneath the lacquered breastplate, the heavy iron helmet, and the bellows mask attached to it. He had not removed that mask once since negotiations had begun, and as far as the others could tell, he hadn't eaten or drunk anything either. In fact, he had been so silent and still, most had forgotten he was there at all.
I have seen the threat Crag speaks of. I have stood in its path, and I have fought it.
Hauptmann held out one hand and flexed the fingers. They moved with a soft, mechanical whirring beneath the gauntlet, betraying the appendage's artificial nature.
That battle is part of what made me the man I am today. So when I tell you the time for bluster and negotiation is past, I urge you to believe me.
Bold words, Ironhelm, Teak said, taking a swig from his goblet before setting it down with exaggerated care. But words are easily said. Silence rang in the crucible, broken only by the soft, mechanical whirring of Hauptmann's breath. Gazes shifted as each of the members of this meeting sized the others up, feeling the violence brewing in the air. The silence was broken by a sound none had expected. A thick, burbling sound like a sucking chest wound full of blood. Hauptmann Ironhelm was laughing.
You want to see what these things are capable of, do you?
Hauptmann said.
Very well. I will show you.
Hauptmann reached up to his bellows mask and disconnected it with a hiss of gas. Taking the mask firmly in one hand, he swiveled it to one side and raised his head so that all of those gathered in the chamber could see his face. The collected dwarves gasped. All of the color drained from Darnath Redhand's face, and Teak Caldera looked like he was going to spew the wine he'd been drinking. Dendra Delver, who hadn't chosen a side yet, put a hand to her mouth. Even the stoic Shadden Crag's mouth turned down at the corners. Once they'd all been given a chance to see what lay beneath the mask, Hauptmann reconnected the apparatus and took a long breath.
The march of the Deathless is not the threat,
Hauptmann said, clasping his hands behind his back as he addressed the rapt, horrified faces staring at him.
It is what they bring along with them. It is the pestilence that fouls the air. It is the rot that poisons everything they touch. It is the fact that every one of you who falls is another in their ranks. It is not enough to merely kill the vessels they inhabit, for this simply allows them to spew their vile poison into the air. They must be utterly destroyed, purged with fire until there is nothing left but ashes. We have fought this war alone, and we have done so without complaint. You have wasted enough time arguing. Now will you stand with us, or will you let the foundation we have held crumble because you were not willing to do your part?
Clan Redhill will stand, Darnath said, hammering his own fist on the table.
Clan Delver will pledge its strength and open its armories,
Dendra Delver said.
My word on it.
Clan Crag will answer the call, Shadden said, his voice as formal and unsmiling as his face. There was a brief pause, and all eyes turned toward Teak Caldera. He rubbed his hand across his mouth, shaking his head slowly. He looked sickly and shocked sober, but his voice was clear enough. Clan Caldera will support this action. Hauptmann Ironhelm nodded once, and then strode away from the table without another word. He stood near one of the switches to open the door and waited for the others. The decision was made. He just hoped it hadn't been made too late. Thank you for staying to the end of this story. The Fellowship of Iron is the introductory story from the RPG supplement A Dekas of Dwarven Clans, and it represents a start of a new journey. For those who would like to see about the War of the Deathless, and to hear more about the clans who have joined the battle against them, subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it around, and leave your thoughts in the comments about what should happen next.